Close your eyes. Outside, a heavy mist is settling over the honey-colored stones of the Cotswolds, silencing the world beyond your window. But here, inside the Quilt Maker's cottage, the air smells of dried lavender and the faint, sweet smoke of a dying hearth. Listen to the rhythmic silver chime of a needle passing through layers of soft flannel and heavy wool. With every stitch, a part of your day unravels. With every fold of velvet, your thoughts grow heavier, warmer, safer. You are protected here. You are tucked away from the cold. Let the weight of the quilt settle over you now. It's time to drift. It's time to dream. Part 1. Arrival in the Cotswolds. The coach had been rolling for a long time. You are not quite sure how long. The hours had softened and blurred somewhere past the last market town, somewhere between the turning of the wheels and the steady, lulling sway of the carriage. The countryside beyond the misted window had grown quieter, the fields flattening into gentle rolls, the hedgerows thickening with frost, and the sky above deepening from a pale, washed gray into something warmer, a slow, amber-tinged dusk settling over the hills like a heavy blanket drawn up to the chin. You let your eyes close for a moment, then open them again. And there, as if the village had simply appeared while you were not looking, is the first gentle glow of window light through the fog. The village comes to you slowly, the way all the best things do. First, only shapes, dark forms rising from the mist, the curved spines of rooftops, the soft suggestion of chimney stacks, a church tower, standing patient and still against the violet sky. Then, as the coach rounds the final bend and begins to slow, the shapes gather detail. Stone walls the color of warm honey, cobblestones slick with cold evening damp, narrow lanes between the cottages, barely wide enough for a cart, wound about with climbing ivy gone rust red with the season. The coachman says nothing. He simply draws the horses to a gentle stop, and you step down onto the cobblestones, and for a moment you only stand there, breathing. The air is cold, softly, perfectly cold, the kind of cold that is not harsh but simply present, settling around your shoulders like a shawl of clean winter air. And with it comes the scent. Wood smoke. That old, unhurried scent of wood smoke curling from a dozen chimneys at once, rich and amber dark, and utterly comforting in the way that only a few scents in the world can be. Scents that reach back past thought, past memory, past all the complexity of the waking day, and simply say, you are safe now. You are somewhere warm. You breathe it in slowly, let it settle. The village is not silent, but its sounds are soft, muffled, distant, as though the fog has laid a gentle hand over everything and hushed it to a murmur. Somewhere, not far away, the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones, rolling slow and even, a rhythm like a quiet heartbeat. The wheels turn and turn, and their sound grows gradually fainter, rolling away down some unseen lane until it dissolves into the mist entirely. Footsteps, soft and unhurried, pass somewhere behind you. A woman with a basket, her heels a gentle tap, tap, tap on the wet stone, growing quieter, fading. A door opens somewhere, a brief swell of warmth and light, the murmur of low voices, and then closes again with a soft click, leaving only the hush. Somewhere above you, a bird settles into the eaves with a small flutter, then goes still. The village breathes slowly. You breathe with it. The amber light from the windows is the most beautiful thing. Each cottage window glows like a lantern set deep in the stone. the old mullioned glass catching the firelight within and fracturing it gently, casting long, soft-edged diamonds of gold out onto the wet cobblestones at your feet. You walk slowly, no particular hurry, your traveling bag carried easy at your side, your footsteps quiet against the stones. You pass a baker's, long since shuttered for the evening, its sign swaying faintly in the gentlest of cold breezes. You pass the post office, a single oil lamp burning in its window, the flame perfectly still. You pass an old stone wall, draped in dead wisteria, its gnarled branches silver with frost, and through a low gate you see the glimmer of a kitchen fire through a cottage window. A woman at a table, moving slowly, bent over some gentle evening task. The light everywhere is amber, warm amber and pale gold, and the soft blue-gray of the mist between them. Dusk has fully fallen now, but it is not dark the way that darkness is cold or threatening. It is dark the way thick wool is dark, the way a closed eye is dark. Simply soft, simply restful. You walk on, unhurried. And then you see the sign. It is a small sign hung on a bracket of wrought iron above a low doorway, a wooden panel painted in faded cream and carved into its surface with great patience and evident love, the image of a needle threaded with a looping length of thread. The carving is simple but very fine, the grooves worn smooth with age, and the sign hangs with a gentle, barely there sway, turning just slightly in the cool air before settling again. Beneath the needle and thread, in small, careful lettering, the words, "The Quilt Maker." You stop. Through the window, low, wide, the old glass uneven and full of soft distortions. You can see them. The quilts. They are folded in neat, beautiful stacks along the deep sill and on a long wooden shelf behind it. And even through the frost-hazed glass and the amber warmth of the interior light, their colors are extraordinary. Deep blues and soft greens, and the rich red of old roses, and a cream so warm it is almost gold. Patchwork patterns, tiny pieces fitted together with such care, such patient precision, catch the firelight and glow. The frosty glass is cold beneath your fingertip when you reach out, almost without meaning to, and touch it gently. Inside, the hearth is burning. You can see the firelight moving on the far stone wall, warm, alive, steadily breathing. You do not know what brings you to the door. Perhaps the cold, perhaps the light, perhaps simply the feeling, that old instinctive feeling that certain places give you, the feeling that says, here, this is the right place. This is where you are meant to be this evening. You lift the small iron knocker, shaped, you notice, like a thimble, and let it fall very gently against the wooden door. A pause, the soft crackle of the fire within, the distant, muffled tick of a clock. Then footsteps, quiet, unhurried, moving slowly toward the door with no sense of urgency whatsoever. The footsteps of someone for whom the whole of the evening is calm and accounted for whom nothing is rushed or unexpected. The door opens. The quilt maker is elderly, truly, softly elderly in the way that very old trees are, which is to say that their age seems not like a diminishment, but a kind of gathered richness, a depth accumulated slowly over many years. Their hair is white, very fine, swept back simply. Their eyes, catching the warm light from within, are quiet and clear. Eyes that have looked at many things carefully and found most of them beautiful. They are wearing a plain dark dress beneath a long cream-colored apron, and the apron has small faded stains of something that might be indigo dye or blackcurrant jam. And around their collar is a length of soft flannel, loosely wound against the cold. Their hands, resting on the doorframe, are small and extremely capable looking, with the kind of fine, papery texture that speaks of decades of patient work. They look at you. Their expression does not change with surprise or question or any of the ordinary social calculations. They simply look at you, and their look is simply kind. You look cold, they say. Their voice is low, unhurried, with the particular softness of someone who has spent many long evenings in a quiet cottage and has long since stopped feeling the need to raise it. Come in, then. It is not a question. The warmth that reaches you as you step through the door is extraordinary. It is not the sharp warmth of an overheated room. It is the deep warmth of a room that has been warm for a very long time, a warmth that has seeped into the stone walls and the flagged floor and the heavy curtains and the wooden beams above, a warmth that is almost a presence in itself, gentle, pervasive, completely enveloping. You cross the threshold, and the cold of the evening falls away from your shoulders like something set down, and you are inside. The door closes softly behind you. The fire crackles on the hearth, steady and low. The room is full of color and texture and the warm smell of wood smoke and something else, something quiet and sweet. Lavender, perhaps, or beeswax, or simply the long ingrained fragrance of a room where beautiful cloth has been folded and handled and cared for over many, many years. The quilt maker moves back toward the fire, unhurried, and gestures to a low-cushioned chair drawn close to the hearth. "Sit," they say. "There is tea." You sit down. The chair is very soft. The fire is very warm. Outside, the mist has thickened around the village, and the cobblestones are silver dark, and somewhere the sound of carriage wheels is rolling slowly, gently away into the distance. You let out a long, slow breath, and you feel simply, completely, without any remaining effort, at rest. The fire burns low and steady on the hearth. The quilts glow in the amber light. The village breathes quietly outside. And here, in this small, warm room at the end of the day, everything is exactly as it should be. Part 2. Inside the quilt maker's workshop, the chair holds you like something that has been waiting. It is low and wide and upholstered in a fabric the color of old moss. Thick, slightly worn at the arms, the cushion shaped by years of use into something that fits the body perfectly, welcomingly, as though it were made not for anyone in particular, but for anyone who needed, at the end of a long day, simply to sit down and stop. You settle into it, and it settles around you, and the fire before you breathes its quiet, orange breath. And for a moment, you do nothing at all except exist in the warmth. The room arranges itself slowly around you, the way rooms do when you are truly still in them, when you are not moving through them or searching them for something, but simply in them, receiving. The workshop is not large, but it is full, not crowded, not cluttered, full in the way that a life well lived is full. Every inch of it occupied by something that belongs there, something with a history and a purpose, nothing superfluous, nothing accidentally arrived. The stone walls are thick and old, the kind of walls that hold warmth the way cupped hands hold water. Carefully, completely. The ceiling is low, crossed with dark wooden beams, and from one of them hangs a small bunch of dried lavender, its color faded now to the softest gray purple, its scent still faintly present in the warm air. Along the far wall, run the work tables. There are 2 of them, long and broad, their surfaces of smoothed old oak worn pale in the places where hands and fabric have passed most often, and upon them rest the materials of the craft in a state of beautiful, particular order. Bolts of fabric are stacked at one end, velvet the color of midnight, and forest and deep burgundy, flannel in softer tones of gray and oat and dusty rose, silk in lengths that catch the firelight and throw it back in slow, rippling shifts of gold and cream. Each bolt is neatly rolled, neatly stacked, the edges aligned with quiet care. Beside the bolts, the baskets. There are 4 of them at least, large and wide and overflowing with fabric scraps. Pieces of every size and color, some no larger than a playing card, others long irregular strips, all of them sorted loosely, tumbled together in the baskets in a way that is not quite orderly, but is somehow still pleasing. A harvest of color and texture gathered from 100 different projects. You can see, from where you sit, a scrap of deep green velvet, a torn triangle of yellow cotton printed with small blue flowers, a length of cream silk ribbon coiled loosely on top, and beneath it all, buried almost out of sight, a piece of something red and woolen that might once have been a child's winter coat. The spools of thread stand in rows along a narrow shelf above the nearer table. There are many of them, dozens, perhaps, each one wound with its own particular color, and in the firelight they form a long, glowing sequence of hues that is almost like a painting. The deep navies and forest greens at one end, moving through teals and sage and the warm gray of early morning sky, into the yellows and golds and soft ambers of the middle, then on to the pinks, the roses, the faded mauves, and finally, at the far end, the creams and the whites, and one spool of the purest silver thread that catches the fire more than any of the others and holds it like a small, steady star. The quilt maker moves among all of this without haste, without drama, in the easy, practiced way of someone who has moved among these same objects every day for longer than they could easily count. They do not bump the baskets or disturb the folded cloth. They simply move, slowly, quietly, with a sureness of hand and foot that is deeply calming to watch, the way it is calming to watch a river moving in a familiar channel. From somewhere deeper in the cottage comes the small, clear sound of water being poured. You hear it clearly in the hush. The liquid sound of water filling a kettle, unhurried, the pitch rising gradually as the vessel fills, and then a soft metallic clink as the kettle is set upon the hob, and then the very faint, low sigh of heat beginning its slow work. The quilt maker returns to the workshop, drying their hands on the edge of their apron. Chamomile, they say, by way of explanation, and you nod, and that is the whole of the conversation about it. 3 syllables, entirely sufficient. They pull a second, smaller chair from beneath the nearer work table, a plain wooden chair with a cushion of faded blue tied to its seat, and place it beside your own, close to the fire, and sit down, with the slow, considered movement of someone who does not sit down carelessly, but attends to it, settling into stillness as deliberately as they settle into work. For a little while, neither of you speaks. The fire speaks for you. It crackles, a small, bright crackle, as a piece of wood shifts and releases its stored air in a tiny, quick burst, and then settles back into its low, steady conversation with itself. The sound of it is extraordinary when you attend to it closely. It is not one sound, but many, a continuous layered murmur of soft hisses and ticks and occasional deeper pops. the wood contracting and expanding and giving itself over slowly to the heat, and beneath all of that, the deeper, barely audible sound of the draw, the chimney, breathing the smoke upward into the cold dark above the cottage, patient and unhurried. The shadows move on the flagged stone floor, long, warm, amber shadows cast by the firelight, shifting gently as the flames rise and fall. They move across the floor and up the far wall and over the stacked bolts of fabric, and where they touch the silk, the light seems to sink into it and glow from within, as though the fabric itself were faintly, warmly lit. The ticking of the grandfather clock reaches you from the hallway beyond. It is steady, completely, absolutely steady. The kind of steadiness that is not merely mechanical, but feels almost intentional, almost kind. Tick, tick, tick. Low and resonant, each beat a small, contained sound that falls and is absorbed by the warm air of the room and replaced, without pause, by the next. You have heard clocks all your life, and yet this one, in this room, at this hour, seems to be doing something slightly different from what clocks usually do. It is not measuring the passage of time so much as it is anchoring it, holding the present moment open, spacious, unhurried, saying in its quiet, rhythmic way, there is no rush. There is only now. Tick, and now. Tick, and now. The kettle begins, very faintly, to sing. Not a whistle, not yet, simply the first, barely there murmur of warming water, a sound so soft you might almost imagine it, a low and gentle hum that rises by degrees as the heat builds beneath it. You listen to it without effort, without intention, the way you listen to rain, simply aware of it, simply receiving it. As it rises and fills the quiet spaces between the ticking of the clock and the breathing of the fire, the quilt maker rises. Their footsteps move to the kitchen and back. You hear the small sounds, one after another, each one quiet and distinct and deeply familiar in the way that domestic sounds always are. The chime of a teapot lid lifted, the gentle clink of a cup placed on a saucer, the soft sound of liquid poured in a slow, steady stream. Then the carrying of it, the light, careful footsteps returning, and the quilt maker is beside you again, placing the teacup gently into your hands. The cup is warm through the porcelain. Not hot, warm. Exactly, precisely warm. The warmth of something that will be kind to your hands and your throat and your chest. The tea inside is pale gold in the firelight, and from its surface rises a thin thread of steam curling slowly upward, dissipating into the warm air of the room. You bring it close and breathe before you drink. Chamomile, and beneath it, or perhaps woven through it, as threads are woven through cloth, the faintest suggestion of honey and something else, something you cannot quite name, something slightly sweet and green and ancient. You think, without quite knowing why, of open meadows in late summer, of long, slow afternoons, of drowsiness. You drink. Slowly, the scent of the room settles around you as you drink. It is the scent of lavender, that dried bunch above, releasing its quietest ghost of fragrance into the warm air, and the scent of beeswax from the candles on the mantelpiece, burning low and steady, and the deeper, older scent of the room itself, the cloth and the wooden beams, and the cold stone warmed by long years of fire. It is a scent that does not ask anything of you. It is simply present, like the warmth, like the ticking of the clock, like the amber light, a layer of comfort that you receive without effort, without decision. The quilt maker reaches into the nearer basket and draws out a long piece of navy flannel, spreading it across their lap with the quiet attention of someone examining something they know very well. This one needs finishing, they say. Not to you particularly, not requiring a reply. Simply observing. Their hands move to the small wooden workbox on the table beside them. A shallow box, its lid inlaid with a simple pattern of lighter wood, worn smooth, and lift from it a needle already threaded, laid to rest there at some earlier moment for just this purpose. They draw the needle through the fabric with the slowest, most fluid motion, pulling the thread through in one long, unhurried arc, and then back, and then through again. The sound of it is almost imperceptible. The faintest shush of thread through cloth, the tiniest whisper of resistance, and then release, over and over, in a rhythm as steady as breathing. You do not try to watch. You simply let your eyes rest on the firelight. The heavy cloth in the basket shifts faintly as the warmth from the fire stirs the air. The silk on the work table catches the light and holds it. From outside, very far away, softened almost to silence by the fog and the thick old walls, you hear the faint sound of the village settling into its evening. A door closing somewhere, a horse shifting in a stable yard, the distant sound of bells from the church tower tolling the hour in slow, resonant strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each stroke fades completely before the next arrives. The silence between them is immense and soft. The quilt maker sews on, unhurried. The fire breathes. The clock ticks. The steam from your teacup rises and thins and disappears. The dried lavender above the beam releases its quiet scent into the warm air, and the beeswax candles burn without flickering. And the quilts on their shelves and their folded stacks glow softly in the amber light, each one a gathered warmth, a patient record of careful hands and slow hours, and love translated, stitch by stitch, into cloth. You hold your teacup in both hands and feel the last of the cold leave your bones. It goes gradually, the way cold always goes when warmth is patient with it, not driven out, but simply replaced, degree by degree, until at some point you realize that you are entirely warm, from your hands to your feet to somewhere deep in your chest, and that the warmth is not only from the fire or the tea, but from the room itself, from the particular quality of this evening in this place. The quilt maker glances up from their work, just briefly, and their quiet eyes meet yours, and they give the smallest, most unhurried nod. Nothing more than an acknowledgement, a small and wordless yes. You are welcome here. Yes, you are quite safe. Yes, there is nowhere you need to be. And then their eyes return to the flannel in their lap, and the needle continues its slow, soft, rhythmic passage through the cloth. Shush, shush, shush. The fire settles with a soft, deep sigh. Outside, the fog has grown still. The cobblestones are dark and quiet. The amber light glows from the mullioned window, steady and warm, a small beacon in the winter dusk. Inside, the clock ticks on. The needle draws its thread. The lavender breathes its gentle breath, and you sit, held in the warmth, your hands around your cup, your eyes soft and heavy, the long day dissolving slowly, completely into the amber quiet of the Quilt Maker's room. Part 3. The guest room above the hearth. The Quilt Maker sets down their needle at some point. You are not sure exactly when. Time has been moving differently here. Not slowly exactly, and not quickly. Simply softly, the way it moves when you are not watching it, when you have stopped needing it to be in a particular thing. The fire has burned lower. The candles on the mantelpiece have shortened by a small degree. Outside, the fog has deepened from dusk into the full, still dark of a winter evening. And the mullioned window now shows only the faintest suggestion of the lane beyond, a dim reflection of the firelight against the glass, and behind it, darkness and silence. The Quilt Maker folds the navy flannel with the same unhurried care with which they do everything. Once, neatly, smoothing the fold with the flat of their hand, and sets it aside. There is a room, they say. Just above it will be warm enough. The chimney runs up through the center of the house. They say it simply, as a statement of fact, as an offering without obligation. And you find that you have nothing to say in return except a quiet, genuine thank you, and they receive it with a small nod and rise from their chair to light the way. The staircase is narrow. It rises from the far corner of the workshop, a door you had not particularly noticed, set flush into the stone wall beside the hearth, with a small iron latch and a frame worn smooth where hands have touched it over years beyond counting. The Quilt Maker lifts the latch, and the door opens inward with a sound that is barely a sound at all, a soft exhale of hinges long since oiled into silence. And beyond it, the staircase rises in a gentle, slightly uneven curve, each step worn concave in its center from long use, the wood dark with age and beeswax. They carry a small candle in a plain pewter holder, and its light moves up the staircase ahead of you, casting long warm shadows that lean and shift against the white plaster walls. With every step, you follow, your hand resting lightly on the wooden banister, smooth, cool, solid, and beneath your feet, the stairs give the softest creak, each one familiar vocabulary of sounds that the house has accumulated over its long life. Up, and around the slight curve at the top, and then a low doorway with a latch much like the one below, and the Quilt Maker lifts it and pushes the door open and steps back to let you pass. The room is small in the way that is not limiting, but enclosing, the way a shell encloses, the way cupped hands enclose. The walls close enough that the warmth from the chimney breast fills every corner of it, without effort, without remainder. The ceiling follows the pitch of the roof, slanting low on one side to meet the far wall just above the height of the windowsill. And across it run the beams, dark oak, heavy, immovable, each one worn smooth and slightly rounded with age, the grain of the wood visible in the candlelight like the lines of a very old and very calm face. The floor is wooden, its boards wide and dark, and slightly uneven, and on it beside the bed lies a small braided rug in tones of red and cream and faded blue, soft enough underfoot that you notice it through the soles of your shoes. The Quilt Maker sets the candle on the small table beside the bed, a low table of the same dark wood with a drawer and a simple earthenware jug of water upon it, and gestures, simply and without ceremony, toward the bed. The rails. The rails in the morning light are remarkable. You had not seen them in daylight, and you stand at the window for a long moment, simply looking. They run from right to left across your field of view in two perfect parallel lines, and the morning sun still low, still coming in at a long, flat angle from somewhere beyond the station's eastern end, catches the tops of them and turns them into something close to silver. Not a dull metallic gleam, but something warmer, something that shifts as you shift your angle of view, a light that seems to come from within the steel rather than being reflected off it. The rails glow with a quiet, steady intensity, like two long and patient thoughts. You dress slowly and go out into the corridor. The smell reaches you before the sound, something warm and substantial, something with yeast and butter in it, something that says morning in the most fundamental and reassuring of ways. The corridor is bright now, the small high window at its end admitting a stripe of direct sunlight that lies across the floorboards in a sharp golden rectangle, precise as a letter. And your footsteps on the boards feel different in the morning, lighter, less like intrusions on silence, and more like participation in the day. The door to the porter's room is open. He is at the small range in the corner, a compact iron stove set into the chimney breast beside the larger coal stove, fitted with a hot plate and a small oven, the kind of arrangement that manages to be both entirely practical and deeply pleasing to look at. His back is to you, but he knows you are there. Without turning, he says, "Good morning," in the same low, even voice as last night. And somehow, it sounds exactly right for the morning too. The voice belonging to both in the way that certain things do. Certain voices, certain rooms. "Good morning," you say. He turns then, briefly, and nods. That same small nod that contains more warmth than most gestures of twice its size. On the counter, 2 plates already wait. There are thick slices of bread, toasted to an even gold and spread with butter that is melted into them, darkening the surfaces slightly in the way that only really good butter on really good bread does. There is a small pot of something deep amber, preserves of some kind, the color of late afternoon light through amber glass. There is a boiled egg in a cup. There is a wedge of yellow cheese. There is, beside each plate, a cup of tea so dark and steady it seems to anchor the whole arrangement. You sit at the counter. You eat slowly, without urgency. The food is simple and it is perfect. Each thing tastes like itself, entirely. The bread like bread, the butter like butter, the tea like the particular comfort of tea on a quiet morning when nowhere needs to be reached. Outside, through the now open window above the counter, the station sounds continue their unhurried morning composition. The distant clang of something metal being moved somewhere in the engine yard. The brief passage of a cart whose wheels find the gap in the platform stones and report it faithfully. The soft coo of the pigeon who lives, apparently, somewhere in the ironwork above platform 2. The night porter, though he is, you suppose, now simply the porter, eats beside you in comfortable silence, his cup held in both hands, his gaze directed somewhere past the window and the platform and the rails, towards some middle distance that seems to satisfy whatever looking he is doing. After breakfast you walk. It seems the natural thing to do, and he seems to expect it. He accompanies you without proposal or discussion, simply falling into step beside you as you pass through the door and onto the platform, his hands settled into the pockets of his coat, his pace matching yours with an ease that suggests long practice. The platform in the morning rewards examination. Against the station wall, 3 luggage trolleys stand in a diagonal row, their iron frames and wooden slatted beds gleaming with the same honest polish as everything else in this station that is tended and used and tended again. On the nearest one, a collection of bags and cases waits in apparent contentment. A large trunk in dark canvas with leather corners its brass clasps bright, a hatbox in pale gray with a ribbon tied to its handle, 2 smaller bags in brown leather, fitted close together like old friends on a bench. Around them, on the platform stones, a scatter of mail sacks, thick canvas cinched at the neck with heavy cord. And beside those, a careful stack of parcels. You stop to look at the parcels. There are perhaps a dozen of them, varied in size, each wrapped in brown paper and sealed, some with string, some with red wax, some with both. The wax seals pressed with stamps that have left their impressions in the cooling red. A coat of arms on one, a simple initial on another, something that might be an anchor or a sheaf of wheat on a third. Each parcel is a contained mystery, a held breath, a thing that is on its way from one person to another person across some span of miles in time, carrying inside it whatever it carries. Something needed, something loved, something chosen with care in one place and destined for hands that do not yet know it is coming. Do they all find their way? You ask. He considers this most, he says, the ones that are properly addressed, and the ones that aren't, a small pause. The comfortable pause of someone whose thoughts arrive at their own pace and are the better for it. They wait. Everything that is addressed to somewhere real finds its way there eventually. The station is patient about that. You walk on. The morning light moves with you along the platform, falling through the high-arched windows set into the eastern wall. Windows you had not properly seen last night, their upper portions fitted with stained glass, not elaborate or pictorial, but geometric. The leading, arranged in bold, diamond patterns filled with glass in amber, rose, and a pale clear green, so that the light coming through them arrives on the platform stones in slow pools of color, each one distinct, amber beside rose beside a green, so delicate it is nearly white. You walk through them one by one, amber light, warm on your face and hands, rose light, softer, gentler, turning the pale stone floor to something almost pink. Green light, cool and clear and very still, the color of early spring, seen through a window on the first morning you notice this season has changed. You stop in the green, the porter stops beside you. Around you, the station's morning sounds continue their easy work. A distant engine beginning to stir somewhere in the yard, its boiler pressure building with a low, sustained note that is less a sound than a presence. The light tick of the rails in the growing warmth. Somewhere, a door opening and closing, and the brief exchange of voices too far away to resolve into words, becoming simply the sound of voices, which is its own small comfort. You do this every morning, you say. It is not quite a question. Every morning, he confirms. And it is always like this? He turns to look down the long platform, its length, its light, its patient rows of lamps and benches, and the doors of its small rooms, each one a private arrangement of warmth and quiet. Each one ready. Every station morning, he says, is like every station morning. And yet, a small pause, not quite the same. You look where he looks. The light through the amber window has moved very slightly in the time you have been standing here. The pool of it on the platform stones has shifted a fraction to the left, the edge of it sharpening as the sun climbs, the color deepening at the center where the glass is thickest into something almost golden brown, the color of the inside of a warm loaf. Time is passing. Here, that is simply a thing that is happening, and it is fine. It is more than fine. Time passing in a place like this, on a morning like this, is not loss. It is the way the light moves across the floor, steadily, gently, with no urgency and no grief, turning each moment into the next with the same patient grace that turns the pages of the leather-bound ledgers in the porter's room, the same grace that turns the hands of the brass watches on their shelf, the same grace that will, in its own good time, bring the first train of the day rolling slowly in along the silver rails, its engine sighing, its passengers blinking into the morning with the particular expression of people arriving somewhere they have been looking forward to. But not yet. Not just yet. For now, there is only the platform and the light and the quiet, and the porter standing beside you with his hands in his pockets and his gaze on the middle distance, and the station breathing around both of you, slow, even, unhurried, like something very old and very contented that has found exactly the life it was meant for, and settled into it, and rests. It is the middle of the morning now, and the light through the stained glass windows has climbed to its fullest angle, the colored pools on the platform floor having shortened and brightened as the sun rose, until the amber one has become almost a square, almost orderly, sitting neatly between two flagstones as though it had always been meant to fit there. You have returned to the porter's room. The coal stove has been refreshed. You heard him do it earlier. The soft clunk of the iron door, the settling of new coals, and now it burns with a steady, deep warmth that belongs entirely to mid-morning. Different from last night's warmth, in the way that all familiar things are different when the light changes. Last night the fire was shelter. This morning it is simply a companion, present, reliable, asking nothing. You are in the armchairs again. Your cup is full again, lighter and faintly floral, the steam rising from it in a single fine thread that bends once in some unfelt current and then straightens and climbs until it disappears, as all steam eventually does, into the simpler air above. The porter is quiet for a little while. Not an uncomfortable quiet, the comfortable kind, the kind that has furniture in it, that is full of the small sounds of the stove and the clock and the station breathing around you, that needs no filling because it is already full. Then he says, "I came here when I was 23. He says it without preamble, without deciding to say it, the way some thoughts arrive not as decisions but as weather, gently, inevitably, the natural consequence of the morning and the fire and the particular quality of someone sitting across from you who is content simply to listen. My father had worked the railways," he continues. "Not this station, a larger one, north of here, busier, noisier, the kind of station that never fully sleeps. He worked days mostly. I came here for the nights." He turns his cup slowly in his hands. "I was not, at 23, a person who slept well. I had too much in my head, too many thoughts that wanted to arrive all at once, all talking over each other, the way a large crowd on a platform talks, everyone with somewhere to be, everyone with something important to say. No one listening. A small, comfortable pause. The nights here taught me to listen." You watch the fire through the mica window. The coals have caught fully now, and the light inside the stove is the deep, pulsing amber of something completely committed to what it is doing. "The first year," he says, "I was learning. Everything was learning. The ledgers and the keys, and the way the morning shift leaves things and expects to find them a certain way when they return. The particular sounds of the station at different hours, because the station does not sound the same at midnight as it does at 3 in the morning. And 3 in the morning is entirely different from the hour just before dawn. Each hour has its own quality. You come to know them the way you come to know rooms you have lived in a long time, by feel in the dark. He leans back. The travelers taught me too. Every night someone different. Or not different. Not exactly. The same in their need, which is what all late-night travelers share. The need to arrive somewhere safely, to be seen by someone, to know that whatever brought them to a railway platform at midnight is not the whole of the story. He pauses, and the clock marks a quiet interval, its tick more felt than heard. There was a woman I remember from the second winter. This would have been, well, many years ago. She came in on the last train, alone, carrying one small bag, and she sat on the bench at the far end of the platform for a very long time before she came to find me. When she did, she asked only for the time. She had a watch. She knew the time. But that was not what she was asking for, of course. What she was asking for was the simplest thing in the world, to be spoken to gently by someone with no particular agenda. He looks into his cup. We talked for perhaps an hour about the journey she had taken and the one she was about to take, about her sister in the south and the particular smell of her sister's kitchen, which she described with such care and detail that I could very nearly smell it myself. Something with cinnamon, she said. Always. Something with cinnamon and old wood and the lingering smoke from a fire that had been burning since October. She left on the 5:40, and I never saw her again. But I have thought of her kitchen many times since, and of the way she smiled when she described it, as though the describing were a form of arriving. The fire breathes. You find that you, too, are remembering a kitchen. Some kitchen, some warmth, some particular arrangement of light and smell that belongs to a time you cannot precisely locate, but which is entirely real, entirely yours. The trains themselves, he says, moving the way a good story moves, not by direction, but by the natural drift of one memory finding its way to the next. The trains were different then, in those early years. Not better or worse, different. The engines were larger somehow, or perhaps I was smaller then, and the difference in proportion made them seem vast. Standing beside one in the dark, close enough to feel the heat radiating off the boiler, it was like standing beside something that breathed, not like a machine at all. Like an animal, enormous and patient, that had agreed for reasons of its own to run on rails and carry people between places, and was at rest now, and tolerating your presence with a large, warm indifference. He smiles at the middle distance. I used to walk the length of them sometimes, on quiet nights when there was nothing else requiring my attention, just walking alongside, one hand not quite touching the iron, feeling the warmth decrease as I moved further from the firebox, forward along the boiler, past the driving wheels, each one taller than me, along the tender, and then into the air beyond the cab, where the cold came back suddenly, definitively. The transition from warmth to cold and back again on those walks was one of the most pleasant sensations I have known. I have never been able to adequately explain why. He does not try to explain it now. He allows it to stand as what it is, something felt, something true, something that needs no explaining to anyone who has ever stood beside a cooling engine in the dark and understood, without words, what the warmth was saying. There was a winter, perhaps 15 years in, perhaps more, when we had a fortnight of clear sky, Not cold enough for snow, just clear, so that every night the stars were fully out from dusk to dawn. And the station, which as you have seen faces open country to the east, was entirely visible to them. He pauses then. I have seen the stars from cities, which is one thing entirely, and from fields, which is another, but the stars seen from a railway station in the middle of the night are a third thing, because the station gives you something to stand in. A frame, the arches above, and the platform under your feet, and the rails going away into the dark in both directions, and above all of it, all that iron and stone and human intention, the sky simply going on and on. He stops, not because the thought is finished, but because it has reached a point beyond which words are approximate and the silence is more accurate. You understand this completely. You are very still in the armchair. The tea in your cup has cooled slightly. You take a sip and find that cool tea in a warm room tastes precisely as it should, has become, in its cooling, something different and entirely acceptable. The temperature of patience. The stove ticks. The clock ticks. Somewhere outside, a set of points shifts in the yard with a deep, dull clunk, and then settles, and the silence returns refreshed. What I learned, the porter says, and his voice is even quieter now, settled into some lower register that the morning and the fire and the long, easy current of memory have found for it. What I truly learned was not about the railways at all. It was about the interval. He lets the word rest. The interval between the last train and the first, between one traveler and the next, between a question asked and its answer forming. I had thought, when I was young, that these intervals were the empty parts, the parts to be endured while waiting for the next thing of substance. But they are not empty. They are the most substantial thing there is. A room between conversations is not a lesser room. A night between journeys is not a lesser night. He looks at you. You are resting now, he says. That is not a pause in something. It is the thing itself. The clock marks a soft quarter hour. Outside, the morning light has moved again. It always is moving, always has been, and the amber pool on the platform stones has tilted a fraction further, begun its slow journey back toward the wall. By afternoon it will be gone, and by evening the lamps will be lit again, and by midnight the platform will be still again, and the stars will be out again. And somewhere on a dark road between here and somewhere else, a traveler will be making their way to the station with a bag in their hand and a look on their face that means, I have been a long time in motion, and I am nearly there, and the station will be here, as it always has been, as it will be. I have been here, the porter says, so quietly, it is nearly to himself, a very long time. And I have never once wished I was somewhere else. The stove breathes. The clock ticks. The steam from your cup, which had ceased for a moment, resumes. A fine, unhurried thread rising slowly in the warm air of the room, bending once and climbing. The porter, after the long quiet of his story, had settled into a particular stillness. The stillness of someone who has said what needed saying and is now content simply to be in the same room with it. He did not suggest you go exploring. He did not need to. There is a kind of silence that is also an open door, and his was that kind. And when you set your cup down and said you might walk a little, he only nodded, the way he nodded at everything, as though your intentions, whatever they were, were entirely reasonable and entirely your own. "The East Hall," he said, as you reached the door. Just that, a gift of direction, offered without instruction. The East Hall announces itself before you reach it. You hear it first, a low, resonant hum that seems to come from the building itself, from the iron and the glass and the stone, all vibrating together at some frequency just below music. Not mechanical, not quite, but not natural either. Something in between. The sound of a large space filled with light, and the particular aliveness that certain large spaces develop over decades of being well used and carefully tended. You follow it along a corridor wider than the guest wings, its floor laid in encaustic tiles, deep red and cream in a geometric pattern. 4-petaled flowers, alternating with plain squares, worn at the center of the path where 10,000 feet have passed, and finding their color again toward the edges where feet have not reached. Then the corridor opens, and the East Hall opens with it, and you stop. There is no word that is exactly right. Vast suggests emptiness, and this is not empty. Grand suggests formality, and this is not formal, not precisely, though it has grandeur in the old sense, the sense that means made with seriousness, made to last, made with the understanding that the people passing through it deserve a space that takes them seriously in return. The roof is iron and glass. The iron comes in great arching ribs, each one springing from a point perhaps 30 feet up the side walls and meeting its partner at the apex in a long ridge that runs the full length of the hall. And between the ribs, panels of glass, old glass, slightly uneven, the kind that distorts the light passing through it by fractions, so that the sky visible beyond is not a flat blue, but a living one, shifting and breathing as clouds move across it and as your own position shifts. The light that comes through is not ordinary morning light. It has been worked on by its passage through the old glass, softened and slightly scattered, arriving on the hall floor as something warmer and less precise than light outdoors, a light that belongs here, that has become part of the place. The hall floor is stone, large pale flags laid in a simple grid, and the light lies on them in long bright parallelograms that will move as the morning moves, are already moving, are always in the state of slow and imperceptible migration from one position to the next, the way the minute hand of the station clock is always moving and yet is never caught in the act. You walk into the light. Your footsteps sound different here, more present, returning to you from the iron ribs above with a faint, pleasant echo, as though the hall is quietly acknowledging each step. You let your pace slow further. There is no reason here for any pace except the one that feels right. And the pace that feels right is slow and slower than that, until you are simply walking the way water moves on a still day. Along the eastern wall, a long counter stretches the full length of the hall, its dark wood polished to the same deep gleam as everything else in this station that has been attended to across many years with care and beeswax and the simple determination that things ought to look as good as they possibly can. Behind the counter, a wall of wooden pigeonholes, hundreds of them, arranged in a grid that ascends nearly to the ceiling, each hole the right size for a folded paper or a small envelope or a slim booklet of tickets. Many are empty. Some contain folded papers of ivory and cream. A few hold objects, a small parcel tied in string, a single glove of gray kid leather standing primly in its cubby as though waiting to be claimed, a brass object too distant to identify precisely, catching the hall light with a small private wink. On the counter itself, The instruments. You move toward them slowly, the way you approach anything worth looking at, without rushing the approach, understanding that the distance between you and the thing you want to see is part of the seeing. A ticket punch resting on its side. It is larger than you expected, its handles worn smooth by the grip of the many hands that have closed them together over the years. Its jaws still perfectly aligned, the spring mechanism visible along its hinge, a coiled thing of bright steel, patient as a held breath. Beside it, its impressions, a small wooden tray lined with the circular paper discs the punches produced over time. Hundreds of tiny perfect circles in cream and buff, accumulated like a slow accumulation of completed moments. A brass stamp in a wooden handle, its face too small to read without lifting it. You do not lift it. It is beautiful as it stands, the brass warm and dully gleaming, the wood worn to a shape that fits a hand no longer here, a magnifying glass with a tortoise-shell handle, a steel ruler tarnished along one edge where a hand always steadied it, an inkwell, dry now but stained permanently in its glass interior with a deep, resonant blue, the color of something still present, even in its absence. You stand at the counter for a long time. At the far end of the hall, a doorway leads to the waiting rooms. There are 3 of them, opening one from another in a long sequence. First class, second class, and a third, smaller room, whose classification has worn off its doorplate entirely, leaving only the ghost of letters in the tarnished brass. You stand in the doorway of the first and look in. The room is upholstered in green. That is the first impression and remains the dominant one. Green velvet on the bench seats that run along 3 walls. Green baize on the table at the center. Even the wallpaper above the dado rail running to a pattern of deep green ivy on cream. The ivy drawn with botanical precision and then repeated until it covers every inch from rail to cornice. The green is faded at the edges of each seat, where the light has reached it longest, but at the back of each cushion, in the places where the light has not gone, the original color persists, a deep, saturated green that suggests a garden in high summer seen through a window, which is perhaps exactly what it was always meant to suggest. In the corner, a clock. A long case clock, a station clock, built for permanence, standing perhaps 6 feet tall, in a case of dark walnut, its face cream and steady under a domed glass that has accumulated along its inner edge, a fine circle of dust, undisturbed for some time. The hands are at 9:20. You wonder briefly whether this is the correct time or whether the clock stopped once at 9:20 and has maintained that position ever since with the same patient dignity, neither apologizing for having stopped nor feeling any great urgency to resume. You listen. The clock is not ticking, and yet the room is not silent. The room has its own sounds. The sounds of old rooms. A faint creak somewhere in the floor joists as the building's temperature shifts with the morning. The distant, low, continuous hum of the East Hall's iron and glass reaching you through the walls. Somewhere further still, the barely perceptible murmur of the station's mechanical life, the pumps and valves and pressure fittings of the engine yard, conducting their quiet, essential business in the middle distance. You sit briefly on the green velvet. It receives you with a small sigh, the horsehair beneath compressing exactly as far as it ought and no further. The room does not require anything of you. It has had a great many people sit in it, waiting for a great many trains, carrying a great many different weights of feeling, anticipation and relief, departure and arrival, the particular tension of journeys not yet made, and the particular ease of journeys completed. And it has held all of them with the same equanimity, the same deep green patience, and will go on doing so for as long as there are travelers to sit in it, and perhaps somewhat after. The luggage room is at the station's northern end, reached by a short passage that smells overwhelmingly and entirely pleasantly of leather and rope and something mineral that might be the stone floor itself. Old stone that has absorbed decades of weather tracked in from the platform and distilled it into a smell that is purely, specifically, its own. Trunks line the walls on wooden shelving built for exactly this purpose. Broad shelves, widely spaced, each one bearing its load with the solid indifference of good carpentry. But the trunks are of every size and era, a great dome-topped thing in black painted wood with brass studs. Its lock, a heavy iron face, a lighter traveling case in pale calfskin, its corners capped in silver, a monogram stamped on its lid in letters too worn to read, a canvas bag of the military kind, its grommets green with age, its straps buckled with a precision suggesting the hands that last fastened them were accustomed to precision. Each one is a held life, not a lost life. Nothing here is lost. The porter said as much, but a life held in abeyance. A life paused between one chapter and the next, its contents folded and clasped, and waiting for the hands that will open the clasps and unfold the contents, and step back into the story at the point where they left it. You pass slowly along the shelves. At the room's far wall, 3 timetables are pinned in a row. They are large sheets of cream paper, printed in the dense, fine type of an earlier age that assumed its readers were patient and their eyesight adequate. Each column headed with a destination, and below it, a long descending list of times: 5:40, 6:15, 7:02, 7:45, 8:20. Each departure its own small act of intention, each arrival its own small act of resolution. Between the columns, the connecting services, shown in smaller type with thin ruled lines drawing the relationships between one journey and the next. The whole thing a kind of map, not of places, but of time, of the shape that movement through the world takes when it is organized and annotated and made legible. You look at them for a long while, not reading them, not planning anything, simply looking, allowing the columns of times to exist in your vision without urgency, without the need to find your name among them or your destination or your hour of departure. Simply the times themselves, their orderly descent, their steady promise that the world continues to move, that trains continue to leave, that between any 2 points on this timetable, there is a journey possible, a route charted, a porter on duty who knows which platform and which track and how long the wait will be. Someone has penciled a small mark beside the 7:02. Just a small mark, a tick or the beginning of a tick, or perhaps something else entirely, a thought that arrived and was noted and was then moved past, leaving only this small carbon trace to say, I was here, and I was thinking about something, and the morning was going on around me. You turn from the timetables. The luggage room breathes its mineral smell around you, patient and unhurried. Outside the narrow window at the room's end, the station yard is visible, a wide expanse of pale gravel and old brick. The engine sheds with their large sliding doors. 2 of the doors open, 1 closed. The morning sun falling across the yard in long shadows that are growing shorter by the minute, the day's slow geometry working itself out overhead with no assistance required. A blackbird lands on the window ledge. It regards you for a moment, head tilted, eye bright, entirely unimpressed, and then lifts and is gone. Its departure so quick and clean that it leaves no trace at all. Only the ledge, the window, the yard beyond, and the quiet that was always there. You stand in it. You are in no hurry. There are 3 of them you have established. A large tabby of indefinite age and unshakable dignity, who lives primarily in the luggage room and has an arrangement with the trunks that suits all parties. A younger tortoiseshell who prefers the engine yard and is often found sitting on the warm brick of the shed walls in the late morning sun. And a small, entirely black cat of unknown provenance who arrived one November several years ago and has never left, and who resides mostly in the first-class waiting room on the green velvet bench nearest the window. He carries the food in a small tin, warmed slightly on the stove. Not hot, just the edge off the cold, because it is his view that cats, like travelers, deserve a meal that has been thoughtfully prepared. The tabby appears from behind a trunk the moment the tin is opened, its manner combining urgent interest with a studied attempt at nonchalance. The tortoiseshell must be fetched from the yard, or rather, informed, which consists of the porter standing at the yard door for a moment and saying, quietly, "Mid-morning," as though issuing a gentle reminder of an appointment, after which the cat descends from its wall and arrives in its own time. The black cat is already in the waiting room when you reach it. It is sitting upright on the green velvet in the posture of something that has been informed of nothing and has arrived entirely of its own accord, by coincidence, and would appreciate it if you did not suggest otherwise. The porter sets down the 3 portions on their saucers without comment. He watches them eat for a moment with the expression he reserves for things done well. A quiet, settled satisfaction. Not proud exactly, but pleased in the way that one is pleased by the correct functioning of a system that has been designed with care. Midday tea is made with the same attention as every other thing. The water is brought to the full boil and not a moment past it. He listens to it, the pot on the range, hearing the moment the boil becomes a full rolling boil by its sound alone, lifting the pot at precisely that moment with a cloth around the handle, and carrying it to the teapot, which has been warmed with a small quantity of water, swirled and emptied beforehand. The tea, loose measured in the small silver spoon he keeps for exactly this purpose, is allowed to steep for 4 minutes. Not 3, not 5. He watches the platform while it steeps. You stand beside him at the window, the 2 of you looking out along the length of the platform as the midday train comes in. It comes in slowly, as all trains come in here. This station is not a fast station, not a rushing through station, but a considered one. A station where arrivals are taken seriously. The engine rounds the gentle curve at the platform's far end with a long descending sigh of steam, its wheels already slow, the great driving rods completing their circles with a stately deliberation that is, in its way, beautiful. The carriages follow, swaying very slightly as the speed falls, their windows passing like a sequence of lit rooms. A face here, a hand on a window there. Someone reaching for a bag on the overhead shelf, someone leaning back with eyes closed, already somewhere else in their thoughts. The train stops, the platform receives it. A handful of passengers descend, and a handful board, and there is a brief, ordinary bustle of the kind thousands of times a day at thousands of stations across the country without anyone marking it as remarkable, which is perhaps the best evidence of how remarkable it is. An engine and its carriages and its fuel and its crew and its timetable all converging at exactly this point, at exactly this hour. Day after day, the whole enormous, intricate system of it functioning so reliably that the people stepping on and off do so without looking up, without marveling, without once considering what it required to make this ordinary moment possible. The porter watches all of it. He watches it the way he winds the clocks and polishes the handles and writes the ledger entries and feeds the cats with full attention, without urgency, finding in the watching what he has always found in every task that is done completely and without remainder. The train departs. The platform is quiet again. Tea should be ready, he says, and you go in. The station breathed differently after midnight. It was Emiliano who suggested the walk, not the young porter who scurried about with luggage carts and apologies, but the older one, the one with the silver-threaded mustache and the unhurried way of moving, as though he had long since made peace with time. He had found the traveler sitting alone on a bench near platform 3, coat folded across the lap, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. A quiet person recognizes another quiet person. Without ceremony, Emiliano had said only, "Come, the tracks are worth seeing at this hour." And somehow, without question, the traveler had risen and followed. They passed through a low iron gate at the far end of the platform, the hinges sighing like something half asleep, and stepped out into the open space behind the station where the world fell away into a long corridor of shadow and silver. The tracks ran ahead of them in twin lines, curving gently out of sight toward the eastern hills. At this hour they had stopped being instruments of industry and become something else entirely, something lunar, almost devotional. The rails caught the starlight along their polished upper edges and held it, so that two unbroken rivers of soft luminescence stretched into the dark, parallel and patient, as though the sky had simply decided to lie down and rest a while upon the earth. The traveler slowed without meaning to, arrested by it. "I never get used to it," Emiliano said, noticing. 22 years, and I still stop here most nights to look." The gravel underfoot gave a small, muffled crunch with each step, a sound like the settling of a house, like the turning of pages in an empty library. It was cool out, but gently so, the kind of cool that does not demand anything of you, that simply rests against the skin, the way a grandmother's hand rests against a forehead. The traveler pulled the coat on properly and felt, with some surprise, deeply comfortable. Far down the yard, 3 or 4 trains stood in their sidings, dark and enormous. They were not sleeping exactly. Machines do not sleep, but they had assumed something like the posture of sleep, still, massed, their breath held. Occasionally, a soft metallic sound drifted up from their direction, a tick or a groan of cooling metal, and the night absorbed it easily, the way still water absorbs a stone. The traveler thought about all the miles those trains had traveled that day, all the windows through which the countryside had poured like a film, unreeling, all the faces momentarily illuminated in their glass reflections. And now this perfect cessation. The station building itself glowed amber behind them. A single lamp on platform 1 swept its yellow circle back and forth in a slow arc, moved by nothing visible, or perhaps by the gentlest of breezes. It caught the edge of a baggage cart, the corner of a sign, the back of a bench, and released each in turn, and the traveler watched it for a long time, hypnotized, the way one watches the beam of a lighthouse from a hillside, not for any practical reason, but because something in the rhythmic sweep answers something rhythmic inside the chest. "Do you think about them?" the traveler asked eventually. "The people who pass through?" Emiliano considered the question without hurry. They had stopped walking by some mutual unspoken agreement and were standing side by side between the rails, which was perhaps not strictly permitted, but felt, at this hour, entirely reasonable. "Every day," he said, "and at night, too, sometimes, but not in a sad way. More like, you know how a river thinks about its water? It doesn't mourn the water that has passed. It is simply made of passing." The traveler turned this over. "I used to want to hold on to things," the traveler said. "Moments, places. I thought if I held tightly enough they wouldn't go. And now?" A pause. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird called once and fell silent. Now I think the holding was the problem. I was so busy clutching the moment that I couldn't feel it. Emiliano made a small sound of agreement, warm and unperforming. He reached into his breast pocket and produced 2 wrapped sweets, the kind sold at the station kiosk, hard candies in crinkled paper, and offered one without comment. The traveler accepted it. They unwrapped them in companionable quiet, the paper crinkling loudly and absurdly in the stillness, and both of them smiled at the sound. They walked on. The gravel gave way briefly to packed earth, then back to gravel again, each texture speaking its own particular word beneath the feet. The stars above were extraordinary, this far from the main platforms. Away from even the station's modest light, they arrived in multitudes, crowded and careless, spilled like sugar across a dark cloth. The traveler tipped the head back and felt the familiar ancient sensation. Smallness without sadness, the loosening of something knotted behind the sternum. "I used to think," Emiliano said, "that the purpose of travel was the destination. That all this, the waiting, the passing through, was simply the price you paid. And now?" He gestured unhurriedly at the space around them, at the rails holding their stolen starlight, at the distant amber glow of the station, at the gravel, the cool air, the resting trains, the lamplight making its patient revolutions. "Now I think this is the destination," he said. "All of it, every between place, every in-between hour." The traveler felt something shift, quietly and without drama, the way a door that has been stuck for a long season finally swings open on a warm day, not with any great force, just with ease, and a sense of having always been about to. Gratitude arrived in the way it sometimes does at night, not as a thought, but as a sensation, warm and spreading, beginning somewhere below the ribs and moving upward. Gratitude for this walk, unplanned and unscheduled, for the porter who had simply said come and meant it, for the rails and their light-keeping, for the night bird, for the candy wrapper's crinkle, for the specific cool of this specific air, for being here at all, in this between place, in this between hour. They turned back eventually, neither of them announcing the decision. The station drew them gently, its amber windows like the windows of a house one has lived in for a long time and loves without always noticing. The lamp was still sweeping its slow arc across Platform 1. A night train was being readied somewhere in the distance. The traveler could hear the first stirrings, the low, purposeful sounds of something large, remembering its function. At the gate, Emiliano held it open, and the hinges sighed again. "Thank you," the traveler said. It was not enough, and was exactly enough. The old porter smiled, not the professional smile he deployed for passengers with questions and complaints, but a smaller, quieter one, worn only in certain hours. "Sleep well," he said. "The morning trains are kind ones." The traveler walked back through the station, past the dozing ticket windows, the dark kiosk, the benches where strangers had sat and would sit again, and found the small room beyond Platform 4 that had been arranged for the night. The sheets were cool and plain. The window looked out on the yard, and there, just visible from the pillow, the two rails still ran their quiet course into the dark, still holding what starlight they had been given, steady and unhurried, going nowhere and everywhere at once. The traveler closed both eyes, and for perhaps the first time in a very long journey, felt no need to be anywhere else. Outside, the lamp went on sweeping. The gravel settled. The trains breathed their slow, metallic breath, and the night held everything gently, the way it always does, like cupped hands full of water, careful not to spill. It happened just before the first light, that particular shade of dark that is not quite night anymore, when the sky turns from black to a deep, exhausted blue, and the stars don't vanish so much as recede, politely, as though stepping back to allow someone else through. The traveler had not slept so much as drifted, the way you drift in shallow water, aware of the surface but untroubled by it, and had woken, if waking was the right word, to find the window full of that blue and the yard outside very still, and a feeling of unusual clarity sitting quietly in the chest like a warm stone. Emiliano was waiting in the corridor, not waiting in any urgent sense. He was simply there, the way certain things are simply there in the early morning. A cup already filled, a door already open, as though they had been arranged by some gentle and attentive intelligence that asks nothing in return. He had his uniform coat on, but the brass buttons were not all fastened, and his cap was tucked under his arm rather than worn, which gave him the look of a man between roles, belonging more to the morning than to the station. In his other hand he held something small. He did not draw attention to it. "You're leaving on the 7:15?" he said. It was not a question. "I am." He nodded, and they stood for a moment in the particular companionship that had grown between them, not long enough to have history, but deep enough, somehow, to have trust. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere below, the station was beginning its first tentative stirrings. A trolley wheel, a distant door, the low exchange of voices from the platform staff arriving for the early shift. But up here, not yet, up here, there was still a margin of stillness, and they were standing in it together.
This world reads your posture before it hears your words. It reads your silence before your sentences. It reads your hesitation before your decisions. You thought you were invisible. No. Your energy has been screaming louder than your voice ever did. People notice when you avoid eye contact. They smell it when you are unsure. The world is not cruel. It is observant. It rewards strength. It respects clarity. It follows decisiveness. But when you move without intention, you look lost. And when you look lost, people guide you where they want you to go. Every time you step out your door, you enter an arena. Status is negotiated. Power is assessed. If you walk into a room apologizing for your existence, you are signaling that you are a victim. Power is not dominance. Power is direction. A lion does not roar before it stalks. It roars after the kill. Move in silence. Let your presence be the loudest thing in the room. You've been wearing a mask for years, not to deceive people, but to survive them. You learned early that vulnerability wasn't always welcomed, that honesty wasn't always safe. So you built walls, not to hide, but to shield. The problem isn't the mask. The problem is you outgrew it. You became a deeper person than the surface-level version you present. Your mask is now too small, too tight. It is suffocating you. Here is the strategic truth. The old mask protected you, but the new one must empower you. Be yourself is advice for fools. Be who you must be. Rebuild the mask, not to hide your weakness, but to protect your strength. Do not leak your plans. Do not leak your emotions. Let them speculate about you. Their imagination will paint a picture far more terrifying than reality. You finally choose who gets access to the real you and who never will. This is not isolation. This is sovereignty. There's a fire inside you that you've been trying to control, not because it's dangerous, but because you were taught to dim your light so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. You lowered your voice. You softened your ambition. You shrank your presence. But here's the truth. Your fire was never the problem. Your environment was. People weren't intimidated by your flaws. They were intimidated by your potential. Mediocrity hates excellence because it reminds them of what they are not. Fire doesn't die. It waits, it smolders, and now it's time to let it burn again. Not explosively, but with controlled, cold power. You are not here to be harmless. You are here to be dangerous and disciplined. If they are uncomfortable with your heat, let them burn. The greatest battles you fought never happened in the world around you. They happened in the space between your thoughts. The war between who you are and who you want to become. The voice that pushes you versus the voice that doubts you. You've been negotiating with yourself for years, convincing yourself to start tomorrow, convincing yourself to accept less. But comfort is the enemy of evolution, and doubt is the enemy of destiny. Treat your mind like a fortress. A fortress with the gates open is a ruin. The enemy is not outside. The enemy is the traitor inside you that seeks validation and rest. Stop negotiating. A commander does not debate with his soldiers. He gives orders. Give the order to your mind. Today, you stop fighting the world and start destroying the part of yourself that fears change. No mercy, no hesitation. Discipline isn't about routines, it's about identity. It's the moment you decide that you will no longer betray yourself for temporary comfort. You stop negotiating with laziness. Discipline is not loud. It doesn't require motivation. It doesn't need applause or likes on social media. It is quiet. It is consistent. It is inevitable. The disciplined version of you doesn't argue with excuses. He ignores them. Validation is a drug for the weak. Stop announcing your plans. When you talk about it, you lose the energy to do it. Be a machine. Ignore your mood. Ignore your feelings. While the world waits for a perfect moment that will never come, you act. You execute. Today, discipline is not something you practice. It is something you become. You are not improving yourself. You are replacing yourself, not polishing the old identity, but constructing an entirely new one. Evolution is not gentle. It demands the death of the person you used to be. The version of you that hesitates dies here. The version that waits for motivation dies here. The version that needs permission dies here. Rebirth is not poetic. It's brutal. It's lonely. But if you want to be the king, you must stop acting like the court jester. The jester performs for attention. The king commands with distance. You don't become unshakable by being inspired. You become unshakable by killing every weakness you once accepted. Your identity is forged in action. There is a kind of freedom that doesn't feel warm. It feels cold, measured, silent. It's the freedom that comes when you stop needing validation, stop needing applause, stop needing to be understood. Most people chase recognition. Few chase mastery. But when you master yourself, your impulses, your tongue, your mind, the world no longer has power over you. You become untouchable, not because you dominate others, but because nothing dominates you. This is what we call the ghost. Unreadable, unpredictable. Don't show your money, don't show your next move, don't show your wounds. Become a black hole of power. Cold freedom is not loneliness, it is sovereignty. The power to walk alone without feeling incomplete. Most people will never change, not because they can't, but because comfort owns them. They get inspired for a moment, then return to the habits that are quietly destroying them. But not you, not anymore. This is your line in the sand. The moment where your future self watches you from a distance and nods in respect. No more almost. No more someday. Identity is chosen daily. Through decisions that hurt. Through sacrifices that matter. If you take this step, you will never be the same person again. The herd chooses safety. You choose dangerous freedom. This is not motivation. This is a declaration of war. A war against the old you. And it begins right now. There's a version of you that's silently destroying your life. The weak one. The one who hesitates, delays, escapes. And every day he wins because you let him. If you don't kill that version of yourself now, he will bury your future. You feel it. You know it. This is your final warning. Listen, and listen with the part of you that knows I'm right. Life is not your friend, but it's not your enemy either. It's simply a mirror reflecting exactly who you choose to be. And right now, you are standing at a point that every man eventually faces. Continue being the version that survives, or become the version that leads. The world will not pause for you. It will not adjust to your insecurities, your doubts, your moods. It demands strength, clarity, and discipline. Not because life is cruel, but because the highest version of you cannot be built through comfort. No, one is coming to save you, not your parents, not some magical burst of motivation. Every transformation that ever mattered began the same way, a man realizing that his future was his responsibility alone. So, raise your standards, choose the path that forces you to grow. Choose the challenge that sharpens your mind. Choose the discipline that rebuilds your identity from the ground up. Because one day, the noise will stop. The excitement, the fear, the distractions, they will all fade. And you will be alone with the results of your decisions. The question is not, can you change? The question is, will you finally stop running from the man you were meant to become? Start now. Start messy. Start imperfect. Start without permission. Because your future self is watching, and he deserves a version of you that doesn't quit. This is your turning point. Cross it. Listen closely. Most people think they are in control of their lives. They think they choose their beliefs, their desires, their loyalties. But that is the first illusion you must shatter. Humans are not driven by logic. They are driven by pressure, by fear, by the need to matter in a world that forgets them the moment they stop performing. If you tell a man he is safe, he will collapse into comfort. But if you tell him he is being watched, judged, outperformed, he will transform into something unrecognizable. This is the paradox of human nature. We become powerful only when our weakness is exposed, and the people who shape the world, the tacticians, the manipulators, the architects of human behavior, they have understood this for centuries. They do not ask, they do not beg, they do not explain, they pull threads. Threads you never notice until your entire identity has moved. What follows are the 12 laws of influence. Not tricks, not tactics, but structures that run beneath every relationship, negotiation, and confrontation you will ever face. These laws will not make you smarter. They will make you dangerous. But first, a warning. If you use these laws while driven by insecurity, jealousy, obsession, or fear, they will consume you. Power without discipline is a blade pointed at your own throat. Master yourself, then master the room. Law 1. Self-mastery before all. Power does not begin outside. It begins inside your own mind. Before you dominate a room, you must dominate yourself. Before you command others, you must command your emotions. Weak men look outward for strength, validation, attention, approval, applause. But powerful men look inward, discipline, patience, clarity, restraint. A man who cannot control himself will always be controlled by others. When disrespect comes, the weak man explodes. The powerful man observes, analyzes, calculates. His silence is not fear. It is preparation. Chaos exposes the truth. When everyone else panics, the man who stays calm becomes the one everyone looks to. Self-mastery creates authority without a single word. Law 2. Emotional non-reactivity. You must understand something. The man who controls your emotions controls you. Insults are not attacks. They are fishing lines, bait, a test to see if they can pull you into the mud. But when you refuse to react, when your face remains unreadable, their confidence collapses. Your calmness feels like a threat. Your silence feels like a verdict. Predictable men are weak. Unpredictable men are feared. Become unreadable, and the world will step lightly around you.
Welcome. Tonight, we wander down a quiet Victorian street where the evening air is filled with the soft scent of blooming flowers, and golden lantern light glows gently against the cobblestones. At the corner of Blossom Street, there's a small flower shop, warm, peaceful, and softly lit, where petals rest quietly, and time seems to slow. Inside, a gentle florist moves with calm care, arranging roses and lavender, each touch soft and unhurried, as if every flower holds a quiet story. So take a slow breath, let your body relax, and allow the world outside to fade away, because tonight, you are stepping into a calm evening in a flower shop, where every scent, every color, gently carries you into sleep. Part 1. Arrival on Blossom Street. There are certain evenings that seem to exist outside of ordinary time. Evenings when the light falls in a particular way, soft and golden and unhurried, and the air carries something that is difficult to name. Not quite perfume, not quite memory, Something in between, like the feeling of a word you almost remember, or a song you have not heard since childhood, but still somehow know. This was one of those evenings. The street was called Blossom Street, though you would not have found it on any map you had seen before. It appeared the way certain things appear when you are very tired and very ready. Gently, without announcement, like a door opening in a wall you had not noticed was there. The cobblestones were smooth and dark with the damp of an earlier rain, and it caught the light of the gas lamps and long, amber ribbons that stretched all the way down the lane and curved softly around the corner at its end. You had been walking for some time. You could not quite recall from where or toward what particular destination. But that did not trouble you. The evening was too quiet and too kind for trouble of any sort. Your coat was warm. Your boots were soft against the stones. And with every step you took down Blossom Street, you felt something in your shoulders loosen, some long-held tightness releasing itself, the way a breath releases when you finally, truly stop trying. The gas lamps lined both sides of the lane at gentle intervals, and each one wore a soft halo in the evening mist. They did not flicker urgently. They simply glowed, patient and warm, like candles left burning in a window for someone expected home. Beneath each lamp, the cobblestones gleamed. The small window boxes on the terraced buildings above held the last of the season's trailing ivy, and it swayed almost imperceptibly in the breeze, a slow, sleepy swaying, like the motion of a rocking chair in a quiet room. Somewhere, distantly, you heard the sound of carriage wheels. The sound came from a street away, perhaps two, a low, rhythmic rolling over old stone, the gentle percussion of hooves in no particular hurry. It rose and then faded, as sounds do on still evenings, absorbed by the fog and the quiet and the general softness of the hour. Then there were footsteps, unhurried ones, belonging to someone you could not see, fading around a corner somewhere ahead. Then silence again, except for the very faint sigh of the breeze as it moved along the lane, carrying with it something extraordinary, flowers. The scent reached you before anything else. It was not a sharp or insistent perfume, nothing so bold as that. It was layered and delicate and deeply, deeply comforting. There was rose in it, warm and sweet. There was something green and cool, like the inside of a stem just cut. There was lavender, soft as a murmur, and beneath everything, a faint, earthy sweetness that reminded you of damp soil and glass houses and slow summer afternoons. You breathed it in without thinking, and your pace slowed, and you looked up. That was when you saw the shop. It sat between two taller buildings like something placed there very carefully, given its own quiet space on the lane. It was small, narrower than the buildings on either side, with a front of pale stone and a wooden door painted a deep, faded green. The paint worn soft at the edges. Above the door, a carved wooden sign hung from a short iron bracket, and it swayed, just barely, almost not at all, in the same slow rhythm as the ivy in the window boxes above. You could read the words in the lamplight without quite trying, the Blossom Street Flower Shop, and beneath it, in smaller, older letters, Est, 1874. The window was everything. In the amber glow of the lamp outside and the warm, honeyed light from within, the window display seemed to breathe. There were roses, cream and blush and deep red, arranged in tall, dark glass vases. There were bundles of dried lavender tied with pale ribbon, and small pots of something white and delicate that nodded very gently in the draft from the door's edge. Trailing greenery spilled over a wooden shelf in long, lazy curtains. At the window center, a small arrangement sat in a low clay bowl. White flowers with yellow hearts, so simple and so perfect that you stopped entirely without meaning to and simply looked at them. The light from inside was not electric. It was softer than that and warmer. The amber light of oil lamps, perhaps, or of many small candles, though you could not see their source. It pooled on the wooden floor inside and caught the glass of the vases and turned everything within to gold. Watching it from the lamplit street, you felt the way you feel just before sleep. That particular loosening, that sense of the world becoming gentler, closer, quieter. You pushed open the green door. A small brass bell above the frame rang once, a single, sweet note, and then everything was still. The smell inside the shop was richer than the street, deeper and closer and extraordinarily peaceful. It surrounded you immediately, the way warm water surrounds you when you step into a bath. Rose and lavender and something almost sweet, like honey, and beneath it, all that green living scent of growing things, of petals and stems and the earth that sustains them. Bundles of dried flowers hung from the low wooden beams of the ceiling, soft cascades of lavender and chamomile and pale strawflower. Shelves along the walls held clay pots and glass jars and small paper parcels tied with twine. A wooden counter ran across the back of the room, its surface worn to a silvery smoothness by decades of hands. The shop was very quiet, pleasantly, profoundly quiet. And then, from somewhere in the back, from behind a curtain of pale linen that hung in the doorway beyond the counter, came the soft sound of movement, unhurried, deliberate. The sound of someone who had never found reason to move quickly through a room. She appeared a moment later, drawing the curtain aside with one hand, a small pair of cutting shears held loosely in the other. She was elderly and small, with white hair pinned softly at the back of her head. She wore a long apron over a dark dress, the apron's pockets full of some small tools of her trade. And her hands, which she wiped now on the apron's hem as she looked up, were the hands of someone who had worked gently and carefully with growing things for a very long time. There was soil beneath her fingernails. She did not seem troubled by this. Her eyes found you without surprise. They were very calm eyes. Gray or blue, in the warm lamplight it was difficult to say, and they held in them the particular quality of someone who is genuinely, quietly glad to see you. Not with excitement, not with the bright energy of someone who has been waiting eagerly, but with the deeper, softer gladness of someone who has simply always expected you would come, eventually, and is pleased to have been right. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was quiet, not a whisper, but close. The kind of voice that belongs in rooms like this. In evenings like this. The kind of voice that does not need to be loud because everything it says is worth listening carefully for. "You found us," she said, and set the shears down on the counter with a faint, soft click. She said it not as a question and not quite as a statement, more as a gentle acknowledgement of something both of you already understood. You told her that you had been walking, and that the scent of the flowers had reached you from the street, and that you had found yourself stopping before you had quite decided to. She nodded slowly, as though this made complete and perfect sense. That is generally how it happens," she said. "The flowers let people know when to come." She moved behind the counter with the same unhurried ease with which she had entered the room, straightening a jar here, adjusting the stem of a rose there. And then she looked up again and considered you for a moment with those calm, kind eyes. "You look," she said gently, "like someone who could do with sitting quietly for a little while." There was no judgment in it, no observation that required defending against. It was simply true. "There is a chair by the window," she said, nodding toward it. A small armchair, its cushion the color of moss, positioned beside the display so that you might look out at the lamplit lane. And I was about to make tea. She did not wait for an answer. She simply drew the curtain aside and disappeared back into the room beyond, and the soft sounds of her moving about in there. A kettle being lifted, the quiet tap of a cup set on a saucer, filled the shop with the most ordinary and the most comforting music in the world. You sat in the chair by the window. Outside, the lane was still. A gas lamp burned. The wooden sign swayed. And the flowers in the window beside you released their scent in slow, gentle waves into the warm and quiet air. You were, at last, exactly where you needed to be. Part 2. Inside the flower shop. The chair was softer than it looked. That was the first thing you noticed. Once you had settled into it, the way it received you, the cushion, giving just enough. The arm rests, worn to the particular smoothness that only comes from years of use, and the slow, patient work of hands resting there in quieter moments. It was the kind of chair that had been sat in by many people over many years, and had learned, somewhere along the way, how to hold a person gently. You let your coat fall open. You let your hands rest. From behind the pale linen curtain came the small domestic music of the shopkeeper moving about her back room, the low murmur of water beginning to warm, the soft knock of a wooden drawer being opened and closed, the rustle of something dried and papery being handled with care. These sounds reached you not as intrusions, but as reassurances. Evidence that the world was continuing in its gentle way, that someone nearby was busy with quiet and useful things, and that nothing was required of you for the moment but to be still. So you were still, and in the stillness, the shop came to you. It was the kind of room that revealed itself slowly. You had taken it in all at once when you first entered, the warmth, the scent, the golden light, but now, settled and unhurried, you began to see its particulars. The way the light moved, for instance. There were 2 oil lamps mounted on the walls, their flames behind amber glass that softened everything they touched, and on the counter at the back a pair of candles burned in low iron holders, their flames barely trembling in the undisturbed air. A third light source hung from the central beam, a small lantern of dark metal and clouded glass, and the light it threw was the softest of all, diffuse and warm, more like a glow than a light, like the last light of a winter afternoon gathered and kept. Everything the light fell on, it made beautiful. The wooden tables were the heart of the room. There were 3 of them, 2 long ones running parallel down the shop's length, and a smaller round one near the door, and they were covered entirely, generously, abundantly with flowers. Not in the arranged, formal way of a display, though there was beauty in the arrangement, but in the way of a room where working with flowers is the daily business of life, where buckets are filled and bundles are sorted and stems are cut and gathered and tied, and where the excess of all that quiet industry creates something that is less like a shop and more like a garden that has come inside for the evening. In tall, dark glass vases along the left table, roses stood in loose clusters, cream roses with the faintest blush at their centers, deep red ones, almost burgundy, their outer petals just beginning to curve away, pale pink ones so delicate in color that they seemed less like pink and more like white that had had a gentle thought. Their stems disappeared into dark water, and the water caught the candlelight and held it, small, still flames reflected in the bottoms of each vase, as though the roses were blooming above a very calm, very miniature sky. Beside the roses, lavender, bundles of it tied with plain cotton twine and stacked in a wide-mouthed crock of pale clay. The bundles were dry, and they rustled very faintly, the softest possible sound, like the turning of a page in a quiet library when the small draft from some unseen gap found them. Their scent was distinct within the room's larger perfume, cool and clean, and medicinal in the best sense, the scent of something that has always known how to calm. The second table held the wildflowers. These were looser, more various, more difficult to name. There were small white flowers on long stems that nodded when anything moved near them. There were yellow ones the size of buttons, gathered in clusters. There was something purple and feathery that you had no name for, and something else, a trailing, small-leafed vine that spilled from its container and lay across the table's edge in a long, curling tendril, as though it were simply resting there and might, if the evening continued quietly enough, decide to stay. Between the arrangements, the tools of the trade lay where they had been set down. A pair of long scissors, their blades dark with use, a spool of ribbon, pale green, almost silver, half unwound, a small notebook, its cover soft with handling, lying open to a page of handwritten names and numbers too small and too private to read from where you sat. A scattering of fallen petals on the table's surface, rose pink and cream, and the deep red purple of dried lavender, lying where they had fallen without anyone thinking to move them. They were beautiful there, like something painted. The linen curtain shifted, and the shopkeeper came through. She carried a tray with the careful, practiced ease of someone who has carried trays for a long time and no longer needs to think about it. On the tray, a small earthenware pot, rounded and dark, from which a thin thread of steam rose and curled in the warm air. 2 cups, not matching, but similarly worn, similarly comfortable to look at, and a small dish holding a folded cloth and a few dried flowers that she had evidently added as a last thought. She set the tray on the round table near the door with a faint, settled sound and looked at you. "Chamomile," she said, with a little linden blossom. "And I added some dried rose petal, which does nothing particular but smells very pleasant." She poured without asking whether you wanted any. The liquid was pale gold, the color, almost exactly, of the lamplight in the room, and its steam carried the scent of the chamomile. Gentle, slightly sweet, with the faint honeyed quality of the linden behind it. She set a cup before you on the arm of the chair, on a small wooden coaster that seemed to have lived on that armrest for years, worn into a slight hollow in the wood. Then she settled herself into the chair on the other side of the round table, a chair of similar vintage to yours, its back slightly higher, its cushion a faded rose, and she poured her own cup and wrapped both hands around it and sat for a moment without speaking. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have no particular need to fill the air between them. After a while, she said, "You have come a long way this evening." You agreed that you had, though the distance was difficult to measure. She nodded, as though this made sense. The evenings that bring people to Blossom Street are usually the longer kind, she said. The kind where you have been carrying something heavy for some time and have only just begun to notice the weight of it. You looked into your cup. The tea was very slightly too warm to drink comfortably, and you held it without drinking and let its warmth move through the clay and into your palms. I find, she continued without urgency, that flowers help, not because they solve anything, but because they are very honest about what they are, and they ask nothing of you in return for being beautiful. There is a restfulness in that. She reached out and adjusted, almost absently, a stem that had leaned slightly out of a nearby vase, a cream rose, its head full and just beginning to open, and set it back among its companions with a touch so gentle it barely moved the water. The dawn came in like something that had been waiting outside all night, patient and unhurried, asking nothing. First, there was only the suggestion of it, a loosening of the dark along the eastern edge of things, a softening, the way ice doesn't so much melt as simply stop being ice. Then, a color that had no name, or had too many. Not quite rose, not quite the gray of a dove's wing, but something that moved between all three, as though unable to choose and content not to. The mist that had settled overnight in the low places along the tracks against the station's stone foundations, pooling in the doorways of the goods sheds, caught this unnameable color and held it, and the whole world for a few minutes was made of nothing but that soft, suffused light and the stillness underneath it. The traveler stood on platform 4 with a bag at the feet and watched it happen. The Victorian station rose above in its old authority, the iron canopy with its fretwork edges, still lovely after so many decades of weather and steam. The red brick face of the main building, its high windows beginning to catch the first genuine light and return it in warm amber panels, the clock above the entrance, its hands moving with the same patient indifference with which they had moved for over 100 years, marking a kind of time that had less to do with minutes and more to do with the accumulated weight of all the arrivals and departures that had passed beneath it. Pigeons walked the roofline. A sparrow landed on the back of the nearest bench, assessed the traveler with one bright eye, and flew off satisfied. There was wood smoke somewhere, and something else, the particular morning smell of a working station, metal and stone, and old timber, and the ghost of tea, and the clean cold air pushing through it all like a thread through cloth. The traveler breathed it in and thought, I will remember this. Not the trying to remember kind, but the kind that just happens, that settles somewhere wordless and stays. Emiliano came along the platform at 6:10, which was when he always came, had always come, would presumably go on coming long after this particular morning was only one more morning. In a long chain of them, he walked with his unhurried walk, coat fastened now, cap on, the professional version of himself restored. And yet the warmth of the previous night was still visible, the way lamplight is still visible in a room after the lamp has been turned down. Not bright, but present. He carried 2 cups of tea in the station's thick white mugs, and he offered one without preamble. And the traveler took it, and they stood together watching the dawn advance across the yard. The tea was too hot to drink properly, so they held it instead, and the warmth came up through the ceramic and into the palms, and this was enough. Will you go far? Emiliano asked after a while, "Some distance," the traveler said. "I'm not certain where I'll stop. You'll know when you get there. You said that before." The mist along the tracks was beginning to stir now, moved by the small breathing warmth of the arriving morning. It lifted in soft columns, drifted, broke apart into wisps that caught the light and were briefly golden before dissolving into nothing. The tracks emerged from it in stages. First the rails' polished crowns, then the wooden sleepers, then the whole long grammar of the line running away into the middle distance, where it curved gently and disappeared into a stand of trees, still dark against the brightening sky. Beyond those trees, the world, whatever the world was this morning, whatever it was holding, the traveler touched the breast pocket where the vial was kept. It was there, warm and constant. "I don't know how to thank you," the traveler said, "for any of it. The walk last night, the conversation, a small gesture toward the pocket. Emiliano turned his cup in his hands. "You don't need to. The station thanks people for passing through. That's what it's for." He looked along the platform in both directions, at the length of the thing, the stone and iron of it, the old reliable bones of it. "I'm just part of the station. You're the best part of it." He received this quietly, neither dismissing it nor being overwhelmed by it. He had the gift, the traveler thought, of accepting kindness without flinching, of letting gratitude land without deflecting it away. It was a rare thing, and perhaps only possible in people who had long since stopped needing praise to know their worth. The 7:15 was announced. The sound moved through the station with the low authority of a thing that had been announced 10,000 mornings before, and would be announced 10,000 mornings after, neither triumphant nor sorrowful, simply factual, the world organizing itself in its usual way. The traveler picked up the bag. They stood facing each other in the manner of people who have found, briefly, a profound and uncomplicated understanding, and who know it is time to release it back into the larger world from which it came. There are goodbyes that take a long time, because the words haven't been found yet. This was not one of those. The words were not needed. What existed between them was complete without them. Emiliano held out his hand. The traveler took it, not a brisk professional shake, but the kind of handshake that lasts a moment longer than social convention requires, the kind where both people are aware of the weight and warmth of another hand and grateful for it. "Safe travels," he said. "All of them, the traveler echoed. And then the traveler was walking along the platform, through the low gate at the far end, and out onto the misty path that ran beside the tracks as they left the station's domain and moved out into open country. This path was narrow and slightly overgrown at its edges, soft with moss between the sleepers, the ground giving gently underfoot the way good ground does after rain. The mist was thicker here, away from the station's warmth, and it moved around the traveler's feet like something affectionate, like the hymns of a very quiet tide. The traveler walked. Behind, the station was already beginning to change, to soften, to become more idea than building, the way things do when you move away from them in morning mist. The clock tower was still visible, its face a pale circle above the dissolving roofline. The iron canopy caught the new light and gave back a last, long gleam. The red brick held its warmth for a moment, a final blush, and then the mist folded around it gently, and it was gone. Not abruptly, not with any drama, but the way a dream goes when you try to hold it. Gradually and completely. And with the feeling that it has not disappeared, so much as moved, somewhere just beyond the edge of seeing. The traveler did not look back more than once, not out of indifference, out of something better than that, out of the knowledge that it was all still there and would be there, and that what had happened inside those walls and on those platforms and beside those rails was not the kind of thing that required looking back to confirm its reality. It had happened. It was carried now, in the warmth of two hands recently held, in the settled feeling behind the ribs, in the small luminous weight in the breast pocket that pulsed its gentle pulse, steady as a second heartbeat, quiet as a lamp in a window seen from a long way off on a cold night. The path curved. The trees closed in on either side, bare-limbed and patient, their upper branches beginning to catch the growing light and hold it in fine nets. Somewhere in them, birds were beginning, not in chorus yet, just the first tentative voices, each one separate and careful, feeling out the morning's acoustics, making sure the day was ready to receive them. The traveler walked on, and the world breathed, and the mist went on lifting. This is where we leave them. Not at a destination, because there is no final destination. Not really. Only the next arrival and the one after that, each one carrying its own small revelations, its own lamplit platforms and unhurried porters and nights when the rails hold the stars and everything becomes, briefly, luminous. We leave them here on the quiet path in the soft in-between of dawn, that tender hour when the dark has fully released its hold and the day has not yet begun to press. That hour when the world is at its most permissive, when the mind loosens its grip on all it has been carrying and the body remembers what it is to be simply warm and breathing and held by nothing more demanding than the morning air. Perhaps you are in that hour now. Perhaps the day is already done and the journey has been long and you are somewhere soft and still, a room you know, a pillow you trust, the familiar dark behind your closed eyes. Let the station go. Let the porter stand at his platform, calm and kind, one hand raised. Let the rails run their silver roads into the dark and the distance. Let the vial rest in the pocket, warm and constant, doing what it was always doing, shining from the inside out, quiet and sufficient, asking nothing. You already know the way. You have always known the way. Rest now. The trains are sleeping, the night is gentle, and the dawn is coming. Absolutely everything is well. Most people in Victorian London slept peacefully through the night, never once wondering who kept the great clock tower of Whitechapel alive. But every night, long after the city had fallen silent and the fog had swallowed the streets, an old caretaker climbed the narrow spiral stairs of that tower, lantern in hand. Above the sleeping rooftops, among the slow-turning gears and the steady heartbeat of the clock, he guarded a rhythm that London had trusted for generations. And tonight, something about the tower feels just a little different. So dim the lights, settle comfortably, and listen closely, because the quiet story of the clock tower caretaker of Whitechapel is about to begin.